welcome. Today we're going to dive into a powerful story about what happens when the dream of a global future collides with the reality of local identity. It all boils down to one big question. What's the real cost of learning English? That's really the heart of it, isn't it? This is the big question we're tackling today, and we're going to do it by looking at a fascinating case study. The answer is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Firstly, what is English Medium Instruction or EMI? Now, this isn't just about your standard English class, it's about using English to teach everything else, math, science, and history, in countries where most people don't speak English at home. So you might wonder, why are so many schools around the world trying so hard to focus on English? What is the reason behind this global trend? The main reason is economic. In today's connected world, people think English is not just a language, but a key to better jobs around the world. Because of this idea, many schools in Asia have started special English programs that often cost a lot of money. But that's the big picture. What does it really look like in real life? So let's zoom into one specific community where this educational experiment gets very real. Our story takes us to the deep south of Thailand, a region with a rich history and strong local identity, quite different from the rest of the country. Most people here speak Patani Malay as their first language, not Thai. As you can see from the timeline, language has been a big problem and a source of conflict for over 100 years. Since this area became part of Thailand, the government has made schools use standard Thai, which caused ongoing conflict with the local Malay-speaking community. At the center of the story is an Islamic private school. We call it School X. The school is trying to providing a religious education, meeting national curriculum standards, and helping students succeed globally through one of the very few English medium programs in the area.
This is where things get interesting. When you look at how English was supposed to be taught versus what was actually happening in the classroom, you realize the official rules weren't the ones being followed. There was a clear clash between policy and practice. On one side, the government's policy was actually flexible, suggesting Thai could be used to help students. But at School X, the reality was a much stricter English-only rule. A powerful quote comes from the school's head administrator, a very influential local leader we call Mr. A. He wasn't just a manager, he had a clear vision. His goal was crystal clear. He wanted to give his students a ticket to the global stage. In his mind, the only way to do that was through total uncompromising English immersion. He aimed to create a small bubble where English was the only language that mattered. Here lies the great paradox of the story. The non-local teachers from places like the Philippines and the UK had actually learned some Thai and were willing to use it to help struggling students. But the school's local leadership, Mr. A, pushed the rigid monolingual English zone.
So what was the result? This didn't create a balance. It created a hierarchy, a clear picking order among the languages. At the top was English, the language of success and opportunity. Below it was Thai, treated at the last resort when English failed. And at the bottom was Patani Malay. The language was pushed to the margins of the school days. This wasn't just unspoken. The use of Botany Malays was actively discouraged. One teacher even admitted pretending not to understand students who spoke Malay, forcing them to switch to English or Thai. Mr. A's thinking was fascinating. He saw the risk that local language may fade, but his solution wasn't to preserve it. Instead, he decided to teach Malaysian Standard Malay, arguing it was more economically useful. And in his worldview, local dialect was for home, the standard version was for work. So where does this all lead? What are the real consequences when three different languages, one for the globe, one for the nation, and one for the home, compete for space inside a single school? Here's a crucial takeaway. Bringing in English to push back against Thai didn't create more rooms for the local language. Instead of fostering multilingual space, it reinforced a hierarchy where Patani Malays were stuck at the bottom. At the end of the day, these students navigate in an incredibly complex world with three languages every single day. They need English for future ambitions, Thai to be citizens in their own country, and Malay for their family, faith, and hurt. So what this study from School X really show us is the tough balancing act that communities around the world face. The drive for global success comes with the price, and often the price is paid in the currency of local identity and language. It leaves us with one big question. In his local race for success, how do we protect the very thing that makes us who we are?
So that's a summary of the article Primary Level English Medium Instruction in a Minority Language Community, Any Space for the Local Language. Now, let's discuss more about this.
If you want to excel academically, we must use English. That is only for religious purposes.
So let's start with Thao.
Okay, so the section that I want to focus on is the author's argument about how the school interpreted the national EMI policy. They claim that the school misunderstood the policy by enforcing an English-only rule, even though the official policy allows both English and Thai. So in other words, the authors seem to view the school's approach as a case of misinterpretation or misapplication of the government's guidelines. But I would like to look at it from a different angle. Rather than seeing it as a misunderstanding, I see it as a conscious local decision, a form of bottom-up policy that reflects how local actors reshape national policy to align with their own values, goals, and beliefs. So let's think about the idea of bottom-up reinterpretation. In practice, when national policy travel down to the school level, they rarely remain the same. Teachers, principals, and local administrators interpret them through the lens of their own beliefs, resources, and community expectations. So when Mr. A, the school director, chose to implement an English-only environment, perhaps he was not misunderstanding the national policy, but deliberately reframing it to match his vision of success. From this perspective, his policy is not rule breaking, it's adaptive policy making. So he saw English immersion as a way to accelerate students' proficiency and confidence, especially in a region that is often portrayed as economically and educationally disadvantaged. So rather than compliance, what we see here is agency, a local effort to make national language policy work for local development goals. And I think this is very important because many studies of EMI treat schools like a passive receiver of top-down policy, but in reality, schools are active interpreters. They are constantly balancing national expectations with community needs, parental pressure, and their own sense of what is the best for students. So now When we look at Mr. A's leadership, it becomes even more interesting. His belief in full English immersion seemed to reflect a neoliberal ideology, the idea that English equals local competitiveness, employability, and economic gain. The authors make this connection and it's a fair one. However, I think there's more to unpack. We could also interpret Mr. A's actions as a personal vision of empowerment. Perhaps he sees English not just a tool for the market, but a way for his students to escape the structural marginalization, to access better education, jobs, and recognition beyond the region. If we examine it more deeply, we see that EMI in this context isn't simply about English dominance, but it's also about local aspirations for dignity, opportunity, and mobility. So rather than labeling the school's policy as a misinterpretation, I say it represents a creative tension, a negotiation between structural power and local will. The English-only policy certainly reinforces English practice and may unintentionally marginalize Thai and Malay, but at the same time, it also reflects, redefines what success means in this community. For Mr. A and his teachers, success might mean producing students who can engage confidently beyond their region, who can be part of a wider world that often overlooks them. So, this perspective also challenges us to think differently about how we evaluate language policy implementation. Do we measure it by how closely schools follow official documents, or do we measure it by how schools creatively adapt policy to serve their students' social and emotional needs? If we take the second view, then what happened at the school is not a failure, but it's an act of policy, local policy ownership. So finally, this discussion highlights how leadership, ideology, and local context were deeply intertwined. Mr. A's decision, while controversial, shows the power of local leadership to reinterpret national policy through a community lens. So it reminds us that language policies is not just only about rules, but also about values, beliefs, and dreams, about what kinds of future local educators might want to imagine for their students. So to sum up, my critic here is not about disagreeing with the author's observation, but about broadening it. Instead of seeing the school as misunderstanding the policy, I see it as a site of local creativity and aspiration. Mr. A's approach shows how people at the margins of education system still exercise agency. They interpret, they adapt, and sometimes resist, all in the hope of giving the students a better life. And that's a perspective I think deserves more attention in discussions about EMI and language policy.
I think that's a really strong point about local reinterpretation. It connects well with Hornberg's idea of implementational and ideological spaces, where local actors create space to adapt and reshape top-down policies. So in this case, Mr. A's English-only rule actually shows how local schools fill those spaces with their own goals. So not just following policy, but giving it a new meaning.
And we can also see similar pattern elsewhere. In Indonesia, for example, some Islamic schools promote full English immersion because they believe it helped their students gain respect and modern identity. So, like in this Thai case, English is not just about the global competition. It's about the improving status and opportunities. And that makes these local decisions quite understandable.
So, building on that, I want to focus on how the students react to the school's language policy. The school administrator, Mr. A, pushed for like a 100% English environment and saw other languages as a problem. But my core argument is this. When students use their home languages like Patani, Malay, or Thai, it's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of agency, a form of silent resistance to an ineffective top-down policy.
That's a strong claim. Can you clarify what you mean by resistance? What exactly are the students resisting?
They're resisting the school's specific monolingual interpretation of EMI. The article shows this school went beyond the national policy. The government policy actually mandated the use of Thai as a support language, but the school's administrator, Mr. A, flouted this requirement, wanting an English-only environment. He even told teachers that using Thai was prohibited. This creates a rigid, artificial environment that students instinctively push back against because it doesn't meet the real world learning or communication needs.
Okay, so they resisting the school strict English only rule, but where's the evidence for the agency? So, I mean, how does the article show them actively succeeding by using their languages?
That's the most important part. The article gives us perfect observable example. First, peer teaching. The study notes that when some students couldn't follow the monolingual lessons, highly proficiency students aiding others in comprehending content. This is pure student agency. They aren't just passively failing together, they're actively taking control of the learning environment using their shared languages, like the Thai or Malay, to build a bridge for their peers when the English-only instruction failed them. Second, the Gila example. This one is a case study in itself. A student named Fian is late and hesitates at the classroom door. The teacher uses English. Fian, quickly, Fian. But it's another student, Sharon, who actually gets him to move by using Malay, shouting Gila, which means go.
So you're saying that the students use up Malay weight when the teachers English didn't.
Exactly. This isn't a failure to use English. This is a communicative success. Sharon showed agency. She instantly assessed the situation, bypassed the English only rule, and used the most efficient linguistic tool she had to solve a real-world problem. This is a student-driven agency in action.
So is a resource, not a problem.
Precisely. The school's policy sees Malay as something to be compartmentalized and kept only for religious subjects. But the students show that their multilingualism is an asset. Their spontaneous use of Malay is a silent resistance to a policy that devalues their identity. And the use of it to help each other learn is a clear sign of agency. They're proving that their full linguistic repertoire is a resource of learning, not an obstacle to it.
Um, And one thing interests me in this study is the way that the author convincingly connect EMI with the neoliberal education ideology, where English is treated as the capital for global competitiveness. This connection is useful because it highlights the link between language and power and economy and aspiration.
And it explains why the governments promote EMI to strengthen national competitiveness, attract investment, and align with globalization.
And I think it also explains why many parents support EMI. They believe English gives their children a better future.
Yes, you are right. And in Vietnam, similar neoliberal logic is visible. The National Foreign Language Project 2020 aims to make Vietnamese students ready for global integration, very similar to the global competitiveness logic in this article, right? Families also invest heavily in international schools and bilingual schools where EMI is applied, and native speakers are often prioritized, seen as more authentic or superiors. However, viewing EMI through a neoliberal lens is incomplete from my perspective, as it's genuine student learning quality, it may reduce student comprehension and causing more stress and lower their performance.
And also in terms of language and identity, it reduces connection to cultural identity, especially in minority communities.
And regarding social equity, it can widen the gap between the rich and the poor in the society as well.
Yeah, you have a point there. The new and critic is that language is not only an economic tool, but also a cultural bridge. It is a social, culture, and emotional resource. So therefore, instead of using a neoliberal view, it could be better to reconceptualize EMI through a broader or more balanced lens. In fact, people do not always learn or use a language for economic reasons. It can be also about the belonging. For example, in this study, even though the communities is Malay speaking, they do agree high in curriculum subject and formal communication to show like a signal that the school and the student are part of the Thai country.
And it's also about the identity motivation. For example, a Muslim community in Thailand may learn English to connect with the global Muslim world, not to get corporate jobs.
And of
Okay,
course,
so
the cultural connection, religious community, self-expression, and maybe a global citizenship. So, as we've seen from all three perspectives, the real story here is found in the gap between the official policy and the live reality. Thao show us the agency of the leader, and I show you guys the agency of the students. And Miss Tham showed us the agency of the community and its cultural identity. So this article, I think, gives us a powerful reminder that language policy is never just about rules. It's about the human values, aspirations, and dreams that drive us all. Thank you guys for
That's all.
listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.